kind of a follow-up to the most recent question, but it refers not to allies we're trying to engage with, but to our current NATO allies. Earlier this year, I read the book about former General McChrystal that was written by the Vanity Fair author who wrote the takedown article, or what became the takedown article of General McChrystal in Afghanistan. And a lot of his account about McChrystal and his fellow commanders in Afghanistan talked about their kind of scathing contempt for our NATO allies in Afghanistan, and how little our European friends were really willing to commit on the battlefield when push came to shove. And I'm somebody who, I like to think I'm pretty idealistic. I would love us to have an effective NATO alliance where our European allies going forward were willing to commit, maybe not as much as we do because we're a very large country with a very large military, but at least their part. What do you think we can do going forward as somebody who's dealt with our so-called allies over the years to maybe get them to engage on the same level, if that's even possible? Thank you.
It's absolutely possible. It's a great question. Let me tell you that Winston Churchill said the only thing harder than fighting with allies is fighting without allies. And if you read, this is nothing new, if you read Winston Churchill's book on Marlborough, he spends more time dealing with his political problems than he does fighting his enemies. Eisenhower spent more time seeming to make peace between the French and the British and the Polish and the Americans than fighting Mr. Hitler at times. So this is normal. However, from you young people coming up who have a chance to link with the world, you can never tolerate this sort of arrogance. As a general, you have to maintain what we call a firing squad. And if I had any officer that spoke like you just referred to there, where they denigrate some other unit, I would remove him because he's a bigger asset to the enemy than to us. The bottom line is there is room for everyone on the battlefield. My headquarters in Iraq was guarded by Tongan Marines. And the Tongan Marine, now were they capable of going out and calling for artillery fire and jets and maneuvering against an enemy using tanks? They didn't have tanks. Of course they couldn't. But let me tell you, every time I drove back through their perimeter with their boys laying behind machine guns, and they would very tenderly take our wounded off the vehicles, I thank God for those guys. In Kandahar in December of 2001, when we knew we were going to be attacked and I didn't have enough Marines holding the airfield, the Princess Patricia Light Infantry from Canada showed up and came off, and were it not for Don't Ask, Don't Tell, I'd have been hugging and kissing every one of those boys, okay? But my point to you is, you use forces for the level of capability they have. How about when we had our revolution, and the French forces gave us a few young generals, Lafayette and others, and the Polish von Steuben and others trained our irregulars, and the regulars, who had a fair amount of contempt at times for the Americans, were the French soldiers. And that's how we fought then. This is the cycle of history. But what we need today from you young people is the willingness to sleep alongside people who dress differently, smell differently, eat differently, talk differently, and to respect them for the common humanity they have and find the common ground. Let me give you a real quick example, because I love your question here. One night before the Canadians got there, we were going to get hit. So my counterpart was an Afghan named Galali. If you've read A Bear Went Over the Mountain, he's a 13-year-old boy who's fighting the Russians. He's much older by 2001. And Galali brings his men in to help reinforce my Marine perimeter. A young man from Iowa, I talked to him later, was laying behind a light machine gun. And Galali's people come by and they point to one of their guys, point to the hole. An Afghan boy gets in. They're both about the same age. Neither speaks the other's language. The Afghan boy's got an AK. And they're sitting there, and he looks at the Marine, he brings his rifle up, and the Marine goes, and he points at the belt, and he puts his hands like this. The Afghan kid knows what he's doing. He's got it. So the Marine swings the barrel back and forth, and then he points to 2 cans of ammo, all the ammo he has. And he shows him, when that's all gone, he picks up his rifle, and he's going to go to his rifle. The Afghan boy brings his rifle, He puts it up against the stake, so after dark, he knows where to shoot, so it doesn't just shoot wildly. He nods. They both sit back. The Afghan boy picks up the paintbrush and starts dusting off the machine gun links, and it's getting dark. And I'm sitting there watching two boys from the opposite side of the earth, don't speak their own language, and they're going to spend all night alone in a hole, 30 meters on each side from anybody else, and who knows what's going to happen. Now, if those two young teenage boys can figure it out, I hope the rest of us can figure out how to work alongside each other, and maybe not just in a war, but how do you keep from putting 18-year-old boys into a war in the first place. Now, I'm not into nirvana, and I realize we're going to have to fight to keep this experiment you and I call America alive. But because we're America and we think we're exceptional, okay, but we're not arrogant, we're not dismissive as others. It should build even more respect from us for other human beings. So sorry I went on at length there, but I needed to really hit on that.
Okay, so you have the mic, and then